I guess I got to introduce them. So this evening we have three presenters. All three presenters traveled to the Holy Lands this summer together. And we have Rita McGann, who is our parishioner. And then we, And we have McCauley. Al is from St. Anthony on the Lake in Pewaukee. Yay! And we have Dr. Dan Scholz, who's from everywhere.
Still from Stritch.
Still from Stritch. That's right. That's right. So we're going to start this evening with Dr. Dan, and then we're going to move to Rita, and then we'll finish with Al, and then hopefully we'll tie it up and put a bow on it. Please feel free to get up and have snacks and wine and whatever you wish, and enjoy your evening. Our first presenter is Dr. Dan Scholz.
Thank you, Sue. When we initially talked about this, we had envisioned about 6 or 7 people around the table. So, yeah, you need me to put the mic in my mouth, right? How's that? Yes. Just a quick survey. How many of you have been on a pilgrimage before? Wow. And to the Holy Land? Yeah. So this was, so the majority of you haven't done this. There's a couple of things I did. The first pilgrimage that I led was in 2018 in the footsteps of St. Paul. And we went around sort of, we were literally on a cruise boat. It was lovely. I thought, never having been on a pilgrimage before, I thought great opportunity to lose weight. It's going to be wonderful. We'll be traveling a lot. No, that doesn't work when you're on a cruise ship. But in the footsteps of St. Paul, we went to Corinth and Thessalonica and Philippi and Ephesus, and so that was really wonderful. And one of the things that people had told me about who have gone on their pilgrimages is when you go to the places Paul went, to the cities that he was at, to the Holy Land, you do really begin to hear Scripture differently. And so I just want to bear witness to that there's a lot to that. This, for me personally, I'd never been to the Holy Land. I've been teaching about Jesus and the kingdom of God and for 40 years. And so to actually be there, it was truly moving in a way that I had not anticipated. When I walked on the Sea of Galilee, that sounds bad, doesn't it? When I walked on the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee, it really brought me to tears. It was, you could just feel a holy presence there. So Sue and I and Rita and Al got together and talked about this would be a great opportunity to sort of promote, if you ever have the opportunity to do this, to sort of see the sites. We'll give you our different perspectives on things that we saw. We averaged about, because we counted steps in Israel, we averaged about 5 miles a day walking. And it was hot, it was really hot in Rome, but it was hot in Israel. But we were on buses, and the buses had water, and so it's not like we walked 5 straight miles, but so there were respites and things like that. So it was really a remarkable experience. So I'm assuming that if I just press something, it's going to happen magically. Who's that guy? Okay, I actually want to start with this. So this was actually Israel and Rome. So whenever you go to overseas, to Europe or the Mediterranean, it takes about 2 days because you lose a half a day in time. And so then you have to adjust it. So it really wasn't until day 3, it was 2 days of journeying from Chicago and then over to Israel, till we actually got to the Holy Land. We spent 5 days there, 6 days there. And then days 9, 10, and 11, we were in Rome. So I think, do we have pictures from Rome? I think we restricted this, maybe one picture from Rome. I've been to Rome before, and it's a wonderful place. If you can ever get there, go. But this was really, for me personally, the heart of it. And for those of you who come to my talks here before, you know that I talk a lot about, so this is the Promised Land. And I spend a lot of time talking about just this little strip of land from Galilee down to Judea. It's Green Bay to Chicago. It's about 200 miles, and east to west, it's Lake Michigan to Madison. It's about 60 to 70 miles. So we spent the first couple of days up in Galilee. That was our first spot. If we could do it again, I wish we would have spent more time in Galilee for a couple of different reasons. That's where Jesus did his entire public ministry. And one of the things, and we'll show you in a minute with pictures, that I was not prepared for was to see how beautiful Galilee is. It's lush green. It's just a beautiful environment, hilly and just really in many ways really breathtaking. But all of the places that we went to, Nazareth, Cana, Magdala, Capernaum. The first day we were actually there was in Cana, and all of us who were married got our wedding vows renewed there. And my wife really wanted that to be one of the pictures. I'm like, well, honey, I was limited to like 5 or 6. But it really was beautiful having the wedding vows renewed there. So I want to start just with up in Galilee. This is one of the early things that I saw when we were on the Sea of Galilee in a boat. This valley that you see there, Jesus would have come through this valley when he decides, at least according to Matthew's gospel, after Jesus' baptism down in Jerusalem, so down in Chicago, he's way south in Judea, he hears about the arrest of John the Baptist. And this is right after his temptation in the desert. And so Jesus then decides to leave this area, probably for legitimate fears that he too might get arrested, and then probably wouldn't have traveled through Samaria, probably would have gone up around Samaria, and he decides not to go back to Nazareth, where he grew up. He decides to live in Capernaum. And over the years, I've often thought about why Capernaum, and nobody really knows why. But I have strongly suspected that he knew Peter and Andrew, James and John, these brother fishermen. They're geographically not far from each other growing up, and many Jews would have gone to the Sea of Galilee, up in Galilee. That would have been a natural place for people to go and vacation and relax and enjoy some time. And that valley that he comes through would have been the journey that he takes and lives in Capernaum. I don't actually know if he lived with Peter and Andrew. I suspect that he did. And I suspect that when he heals Peter's mother-in-law, Peter was either really grateful that she was no longer sick or really sad. But Jesus, we came this close. But this was sort of the first impactful image that I had, and just imagining Jesus coming through there and starting again and not going back to his hometown, but going a little bit farther north into Capernaum. And then, of course, Matthew and the Synoptic Gospels all have Jesus proclaiming the kingdom of God. He literally comes into this city and said, it's time for God to become king. And this is what it looks like, healing people and giving parables. And so that was the first image that really left an impact on me. The second one was the call of Simon Peter. This is the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee. This text is what I wrote my dissertation on, Luke 5, 1 to 11. So it's always been a dear text to me. It wasn't until I was in the Holy Land, and I'll show you the next slide, that I made the connection between this episode in which Jesus calls out Peter to be his follower, one of his first disciples. And then in the Gospel of John, one of the final scenes, they're right back on the sea when the resurrected Jesus appears to Peter, and Peter swims in from a boat. I just have the text, or I'm not going to read the text, but just to show you that when, at least according to Luke, he decides to focus really on this relationship between Simon Peter and Jesus. And that from the very beginning, Jesus had pointed him out and said, I'm going to make you fishers of men. the thing that I really like about the portrayal of Peter here, which doesn't really play out in Acts of the Apostles, he's really humble here. And he's really recognized in the moment what's happening to him. And it's a beautiful story. And we were all on that shoreline, walking on that sand, and it was really incredible. This area right here is the tradition where in the Gospel of John, it's one of the final scenes. The resurrected Jesus is on a shoreline on the Sea of Galilee. And we are on a boat at this point. And it probably would have been about this distance from the shoreline when Peter, the beloved disciple, and then 5 other of the disciples are in a boat and they see somebody cooking fish. I'm sure you're familiar with this scene. It's John 21. And Peter doesn't really quite know who that is, but jumps out of the boat and swims to the shoreline. And they eventually all get there, and Jesus is cooking fish for them, and they're eating. And John says, they knew it was Jesus, but they didn't really want to say anything. Like, could this possibly really be happening? And tradition has it happened right around in this area. And we call it the primacy of Peter because, as you can see, this is where Jesus really commissions Peter to 3 times, do you love me? Do you love me? You know that story. And eventually Jesus said, you have to follow me and you have to tend to my flock. And it was sort of the final commission. That whole area, very moving, very powerful. So one of the things that I had experienced, I'm sure you guys will be talking about it as well, these natural locations, the Mount of the Beatitudes, Mount Tabor, the Sea of Galilee, were by far the most powerful for me personally. Going to Nazareth, that 2,000 years ago was a village of 150 people, and today has 750,000 Muslims living in it, and this little spot where Jesus' house was. There were some places in the Holy Land you didn't have to use your imagination at all. There were other places where, okay, I got to really let go of everything around here and just envision what might have originally been happening. But the primacy of Peter and Jesus, those are really powerful images for me personally. This is the only 1st century synagogue that has been uncovered. And one of the first nights that we were in the Holy Land, was it the first and second night? We stayed in Magdala. So this is Mary Magdalene. And they have, and this is true of the Holy Land, whenever you start digging in the Holy Land, there's always trouble because you're going to find something. And then the government's going to come in and say, you don't get to build anything here anymore. And so what they literally are doing, and they were still in the process of doing it, they were building a hotel around these archaeological sites, and that's where we stayed. And so this synagogue, Mark tells us that very early on, Jesus is headquartered out of Capernaum, and Jesus makes the decision, it's time to move around. I'm not going to stay here my entire public ministry. Let's go, and you can see this quote, let's go to the nearby villages. Magdala is only a couple of miles from Capernaum. Jesus surely would have been in this synagogue and expelling demons and teaching and preaching. And I took a lot of pictures of these. I thought this was probably one of the best images because you could see where people would have sit. They sat all around there, and these would have been pillars, and really a moving moment. And I was really surprised to realize that there's not more 1st century synagogues that have been discovered, but that's the only one so far in Magdala. Now I'm really fast forwarding. Now we're in Jerusalem. So we're no longer in Galilee. These last 2 slides are, for me personally, they were very powerful. I had always envisioned the night that Jesus was betrayed after the Last Supper when he went into the Garden of Gethsemane. And he went through the Kidron Valley. And I knew sort of geographically, it's not very far. And I'd also realized that in this Mount of Olives, they're up high, they're looking down. Jesus would have seen the soldiers with torches coming through the Kidron Valley. He could have at any moment in this area just left. He could have kept going. But he decides to make his stand there. And so we spent time there. And there are, 8 olive trees that were still from the time of Jesus. Olive trees that are 2,000 years old. These olive trees, when they're, at least this is what we were told by the guides, when they split in half in their base, that's 500 years. And they split again, it's 1,000 years. And then they quadruple, it's 2,000 years. So just that whole image and idea of some of these olive trees were here when Jesus was arrested and betrayed. Very powerful moment. But looking down and just to the, I think it would have probably been to the south, there were thousands and thousands of graves of first century Jews who believed in the resurrection of the dead and believed that God would usher in his new creation within the city of Jerusalem, and all of those graves still waiting for the resurrection from the dead. I was going to use that image because it's such a powerful visual to have, and Jesus would have seen all of that from this Mount of Olives. And then the last slide that I wanted to show, for years, when people asked me to talk about historical Jesus, and I talk about the final days of his life, I had known that Jesus, after on Holy Thursday, after we leave and we'll wash the feet and everybody feels really good, and we go home and we wait for Good Friday, that Thursday night would have been the beginning of Jesus being tortured. And in Caiaphas's home, now this is roughly equivalent to Archbishop Listecki's home, he had a torture chamber. And we were in there, and we saw the cells that were in the basement of Caiaphas's house, and Jesus, as a condemned prisoner, beyond the cell, would have been lowered into a pit. And that is the hole through which he would have been lowered into. And I had taught about that for years, that we actually, I don't know if people generally think, well, after Jesus gets arrested, he fell asleep in a jail cell waiting for the next day. Oh no, and you can see this, they spent quite a bit of time torturing him, which would have been the norm. So they would have had to lower him with ropes down into this pit. And he would have endured an awful lot of painful experiences. Did you guys want to speak to this at all?
I have pictures of us there, so I can.
Okay, good. You're going to move back to that. So for me personally, these images and collecting the life of Jesus and sort of these natural places that are unchanged was really powerful personally for me. We had 103 people on the pilgrimage, and we had 6 different guides, and it was really wonderful. I would encourage you, if you ever get an opportunity. I'm 63 years old, and 2/3 of the people were older than me. There was a huge chunk of people, 65 to 85, and I was stunned at what good shape they were in. I thought, there's no way you were going to be walking 7 miles today. And they did. They had their walking shoes on, and it was wonderful. So lots of rest. Okay, so any questions from my section? Yes, sir.
Who had the tour? Who was it through?
Nativity Travels, was that?
Nativity Tours or something like that.
Nativity
Yeah.
Tours, yeah. Yeah, they were fine.
Not the cruise boat, right?
Not as good as the cruise boat, that's for sure. Okay, Rita, you're up.
Thank you.
Yeah. The pointer if you want it.
Okay, all right. I've never used any of these things before.
So to advance,
And this is it. So, I greatly enjoyed, the reason I went on this tour is because Dr. Dan was here to talk about St. Paul, and I went up to him afterwards and said, I'm sorry I missed your pilgrimage last year. He said, oh no, it's this year. So there was less than a month to sign up. I had to recruit someone to go with me. of course, there were 108 other people once I recruited someone else, and it was a wonderful shared experience. And mine are certainly the reflections of a lay person, but felt very deeply everywhere that we were. And I thought one of the places where I first felt a sense of Christ's presence was in Capernaum, the town of Jesus. And you see we were there with lots of people. And this is the excavated remains of the town of Capernaum, over which a church has been built, and centered in the middle, there's, like in the middle of the church, there is this glass covering, and it is over what is believed to be the house of Peter, where he would have been practicing surreptitiously, because the practice of Catholicism or Christianity was not legal, correct?
Correct.
And so this beautiful modern church was built over the site, and you can see.
Give her the laser.
She's got it.
Yeah, you can see.
I tried to keep it, Father Joe, but she took it back.
So you can see where Father Tony is looking over, the glass section I showed you, it's over there. And the whole church is built around the overlook to the excavated remains of Peter. And it's quite moving, and to have the mass there, you really feel like you're. And if you read anything about it, I mean, there's a lot of archaeological digging that was done, and a lot of testing to make sure that this was identified as probably the area where his home was. And I think, as Dr. Dunn would have told you, tradition is most of these sites were established by Constantine's St. Helen, his mother. He sent her at about year 312 or so to go to the Holy Land and establish churches where the holy sites were, and she basically could see where everyone was practicing, was showing their devotion, and that's where the sites were explored further and then established as the holy sites. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
One of the big memories I have there is how hot it was in that church. It was really almost unbearable.
So after that, we, again, going back to the primacy of Peter, which was, again, the site significant on two levels, because it was both where Jesus went and first, I wouldn't say the word recruited, but inspired people to join him, and then when he came there again to, like after his resurrection. So I'm not sure the significance of this rock, but I think it's considered.
That's the Mesa, Table of the Lord. That's where some people say he was actually baking the fish and things of that nature.
Oh, I see.
That would have been, that the church was built over the rock where he had the charcoal fire that Dan had referenced earlier.
I see.
Yeah.
And then when you first enter, you can see the lake where people are streaming down to the Sea of Galilee. And basically, this is what Dr. Dan showed from the boat. Like, this is the church that was built there, and this is me struggling because the shoals are actually very sharp, and I had a hard time getting out of the water. So this is Katie, Al McCauley's wife, helping me out. But everyone felt inspired to go into the water, and it was a beautiful day. And so our guide, he was a very interesting individual. He was an Arab, an Israeli Arab, who was a Christian Palestinian. And so he would say to us, so as a Palestinian, it was a subset of an Arab, and he was born in Israel, and he lives in Jerusalem. And he was educated by Franciscan nuns. And of the 30% population of Muslims in Israel, of Arabs in Israel, less than 2% are Christian. So I think that we as a group, basically, we ended up staying in Bethlehem rather than Jerusalem, which is in the Palestinian territory, in a hotel that I think was run by Christian Palestinians so that we could support their cause. So it was interesting for us, but he was very scriptural, and he was a gentleman who had not just been a guide. He used to he went to the he got his political science degree at the University of Israel. I think it's called that. I could be wrong about the name of that. And then he worked in a medical field. He was like a director in a health clinic. And then he decided to do this. So when we were on the lake, on the shores here, he actually talked to us. He asked us to reflect on something. And I want you to reflect on it for a second. He said, this is John 21:4-7. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples, this is after his resurrection. Disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. But our guide asked us to reflect on the significance of being instructed to fish on the right side of the boat. And, there's a group of us, we surmised it was a directive to do something different than they did before. But he had a different perspective. He offered that the right side of the boat was oriented to Syria, and it was symbolic of the other side, the side which was populated and representative of the non-Jews or Gentiles that needed to be captured by the broad reach of Peter's net. So that was like how he presented it to us, and it stuck. So I will now continue. We had a choice of having a fish fillet or St. Peter's fish, and that's what I had. And I can tell you, this is what they say were the fish that are fished in Galilee. And I can tell you there was not much meat on that.
Did you eat that?
I did.
So did I.
Did you?
Yeah, so that's how they would have they would have just cooked the fish on an open fire, and you've got to be very careful with the bones.
Right.
So you got to
Right.
cut off, down the fin and pull out the meat.
I was the only one at my table. How about you?
There weren't many people who ate it. I thought, well, we're here in Gal. Are you kidding me? We have to eat the kind of fish that.
That's right.
I thought John's gospel said Jesus ate breaded fish, so I had the breaded fish. Maybe I wasn't reading the Greek. I don't know.
It was delicious, though.
Yeah, it was. And then this is the house of Caiaphas, and it just, like a lot of these churches did not start looking like this, or the house of Caiaphas is under this church. This is St. Peter in Gallicantu, which Coxcrow Church, because Peter had been denied 3 times, and that's why they make a reference to that. How do you pronounce that? Gallicantu, okay. So just as, I think it's interesting that most of these churches, the original was a Byzantine church built in 457 AD. It was destroyed by the Muslims in 1010, rebuilt by the Crusaders in 1102, destroyed by the Turks in 1219, rebuilt as a chapel in 1300, left to ruins by 1320, and rebuilt in 1931. So these churches are constantly going through the cycle of being destroyed and rebuilt. But underneath this, I thought you could speak to this because this is an overview of this area. And there's the house of Caiaphas, there's Herod's palace, Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Via Dolorosa where we went to, the Garden of Gethsemane. And there's a stairwell along this house. I'm not sure if that's it, but it was right adjacent to the house, and we get to see it. And we can only, I will show it to you, and you can only surmise that this is where the disciples would go up and down to get from Mount Zion to the Kidron Valley, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's not flat. It's
Yeah.
a valley.
And so the Via Dolorosa, the way of sorrows, was the path that Jesus took carrying the cross, the way of the cross, and then the Holy Sepulchre is where Jesus would have been crucified.
Right. So this is entering the church. This is just what it looks like. This is what the main level of the church looks like. But then when you start to enter, go down, they give you this pictorial, the sacred pit, which is A right over here. And there were different entrances to it at different times. And it just, I mean, I won't go into the detail of it, but if you ever want me to send it to you, I will. But this is us entering the sacred pit and assembled in the sacred pit. Now you
Yeah.
wanted to reference.
That was that image that I saw him getting lowered into that.
Right. This is what, and there is, I didn't take a picture of it, but we had a young, he was a person who was going through the priesthood,
Michael Milam.
Yeah.
Michael Milam.
Seminary.
And he showed me a picture, there was a mosaic of Jesus wrapped in rope and being, ascending into this dungeon. It was very moving. But you wanted to make reference to.
Well, Psalm 88 was when we were in the pit. One of the people were asked to read from the Bible. There, you see the stand in the middle picture there. Someone read Psalm 88. Jesus would have been well familiar with the Psalms, and Psalm 88 is, among other things, it says, "I'm in the pit. I'm in this pit of despair." And so you have to, when you think about the torture he went through that Dan referenced, the psychological torture of being forsaken. That I'm literally in a pit, and I'm in a pit of misery because I know what's going to happen tomorrow. So it was very moving. That was a very moving part of that part of the journey.
It was very moving in there. And this is the stairwell that I'm referring to. I took this picture myself, and there are many perspectives on it, but it just goes from up way down. So it would have probably been the one that Jesus would have ascended when he was going to the house of Caiaphas. And to think that it's that old, dates back so far. And so then this is the Sea of Galilee. I just took pictures of the Sea of Galilee. That's Tiberias. And this is just what our group looked like. And again, you're seeing some of this. This is the sites. Coincidentally, I took that picture from where you said, Jesus would have been doing his cooking and they've been on the boat. But this is us just like surveying where we were, and it was a beautiful day. And we could also see the Mount of the Beatitudes, and that's where a church was. This church, the Church of the Transfiguration, and several other churches were all designed by this Italian, and he was named like the architect of the Catholic Church, Antonio Berluzzi. But this was also a very special place to be, and there was our boat. And I had, I think, the honor of doing a reading. This is in Rome, at the Basilica of St. Paul outside the wall. And I did not appreciate the gravity or how wonderful this was. I didn't really appreciate that Paul is entombed, his remains are in this church, and they are located in here. And it wasn't until we were met by a cardinal, James Harvey, who opened up his speech by saying, "I'm sure my accent will confuse you. You won't be able to understand it." Well, he was from Milwaukee. And then he went on to give us a history of the church, the fact that it had gone through several fires and been rebuilt. But then he explained that when Paul was beheaded, he was a patrician woman who was his follower, had put a tomb in this site, and then subsequently a church was built over it. So it was a very special place to do a reading, and this is the reading that I did, which is just, there's me, I did. But it's one of his ending, where he knows his life is coming to an end, and he talks about having fought the good fight, and that he knows that his soul will be in God's good hands. So it was very moving to be in there. And that basically is some of the things that affected me deeply. It was a wonderful picture.
Thank you. A little dance here. Well, I'm very happy to be here as well to talk about my experiences here. I want to get rid of that. You don't need to look at me twice. In person is one, that's enough. Would you agree, Dan and Rita, would you agree with this? These pictures don't do it justice.
No, of course not.
They just, I mean, I've often told my wife, if I could have a dream job, it would be to be Rick Steves. Do you know who Rick Steves is? Oh, who wouldn't want to be Rick Steves? Oh my gosh. These pictures, I look back at them and I'm almost embarrassed because I would have said that doesn't look as good as I thought. But a lot of what was already said, I'm going to refer to. One of the last slides Rita just showed was the church of the Beatitudes. And she saw it from the boat, from that vantage point. We're now on top of that particular place looking down, and there's the boat. That's not our boat. We weren't on it at the time, obviously. I can't bilocate. But I look back and I had more pictures of the Sea of Galilee probably than anything else. I had so many images of my photographs of the Sea of Galilee. It was stunning, it was beautiful. I agree with what you said, Dan, that if I could go back, I would spend a lot more time in Galilee. That whole region was just gorgeous. There was something about it that was more relaxing, more touching, more intimate than any other part of the journey. And I love Rome, I've been there before, but I look at the time we were in Israel as like almost all pilgrimage and very little tourism. And Rome was all tourism and very little pilgrimage, you know? It wasn't as spiritual, for me, I'll just say for me, I'm not sure if everybody would have that sentiment, but the Sea of Galilee was ever present when we were in the northern part of Israel. And I just love this picture because it shows so much of the beauty of the area. And it's not big enough to contain really how I felt about it. My wife would say the same thing. I was very fortunate to go on this journey with my wife. We just celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary last weekend, so thank you. So we'd be clapping for her. She got to put up with the lights. Rita and Dan have both referred to the primacy of Peter, and I love this on the Sea of Galilee, this particular image. And then you saw this already. I gave this, I sent this to Rita. I just love this picture. That's my wife and Rita, and you said that it looks like she's holding you up, but I like Katie said, my wife Katie said, no, we were holding on to each other. Because it is some of the rocks aren't, they're sharp, and it's not easy, it's not smooth sand, and so but I thought about this and this image. Let me back up. Would you agree with this statement? And I'm not the one who said it, I just love saying it though, that we live life forward and we understand it backwards. We live life forward, but we understand it backwards. And I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but so much of this journey wasn't fully appreciated by me until I look back. When I was taking this picture, I thought it was a cute picture of my wife with her, up to her ankles in water. And she hates swimming, and she doesn't like. I got a picture of her swimming in the Sea of Galilee. I didn't bring that because she would let me. But I saw it. It's true. But I thought, I just thought it was a great picture. And I'm looking back at this, and I'm thinking, this is at the end of Jesus' ministry before he ascends, when he says, "Peter, feed my sheep." If you look at this picture, Laurel and Cassie are together. Over there, you got Jack and Mary Beth Blankenheim. Then you got Katie, and you've got Rita, and they're in pairs. And when Jesus sent out his disciples, he sent them in pairs. I just think there's something about that. When Peter was being sent, he wasn't being sent alone. We're never alone because we have God with us and we have each other. And I just thought what a great moment that was to see them leaning on each other and supporting each other. To me, it just really spoke to me. And then the other thing that spoke to me is that he abandoned shoes. That it takes great humility to follow Christ. You have to take off your shoes. You have to wade into the water. You can't just sit there and be a spectator. You have to do something. And this is really, I just think that, to me, that's so poignant. When I'm looking back at it, I never thought that taking his picture. It wasn't until I really gave time to reflect on it a little bit. But to me, it was very powerful. And that's what the Sea of Galilee was to me. It was a very powerful reminder of Jesus' ministry. My second place that I thought was very impactful was Tabgha, which is where Jesus did the multiplication of the loaves and the fishes. And it was impactful because at my heart, I'm a historian. I always taught church history. History is my thing. And I love knowing about dates and when things were made and done, and etc. But I love this particular picture. This was as close as we could get to that. Can you see that little mosaic? It was made around the year 400. I would have to go online to get a better picture of it. Okay? But what you're seeing here, where's the pointer is here somewhere. Can you all see the mosaic I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to go up there and get right over it, but there was a rope. We couldn't do it. They were doing some renovation at that time in this church. And that rock that you see underneath the altar was said to have been the rock where Jesus did this actual multiplication of loaves. But this mosaic was beautiful to me. We bought very little in the Holy Lands. We bought little small things for our kids and for us. But I bought this mosaic, not this big, a small one, because it really spoke to me. Because Jesus took 2 fish and 5 loaves, and he was able to feed the thousands, right? Can you see the basket? Can you count the loaves in the basket? There's 4, because Jesus is the 5th loaf. Jesus' body is the 5th loaf. He's the one that feeds us. And I just thought the Eucharistic symbolism there was just so poignant, was so powerful to me. And the other thing I liked about it was this. And again, this was not until I had reflection. We all went here, right?
Oh, yeah.
So did you see these gentlemen?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
These guys, it's hotter than Hades. And these guys are in there in their full pants and they're taking these tools. And I don't know if you can see it, but they got these little tiles. They're not even an inch by an inch. And they're painstakingly cutting them in and putting them in because they're refurbishing the mosaic. This whole floor was mosaic. The tedious nature of this work. They got fans. The guy on the top's got his cell phone out. He's calling for a pizza or something. I don't know what he's calling for. But you can see the guy at the bottom, they're getting tips. People were so impressed they were leaving them money. But the point is, these people were painstaking. It made me wonder, boy, what was it like to do this back in the year 400? You know, to do it that way. But the other thing I thought was this. As I look at this, I thought, in that story of the multiplication of loaves, when the disciples come to Jesus and say, hey, we got all these hungry people, Jesus says, well, give them something to eat. We don't have enough. We can't do it. And that's when Jesus does his miracle. It's as if to say, we can't, listen, we're not alone in this. God's with us. You do your work. You give it to God. God's going to multiply it. You be your good Christian in your little corner of the world. Give that to God and God will multiply it. And I think what these guys are doing was kind of symbolic of that to me, at least. That's how I looked at it. I just thought this was just a really neat area to visit, to see where Jesus performed that particular miracle. Third one is the Jordan River. Can you see the animal there? So I was very fortunate to do some speaking like Dan did on this journey at different spots, and we had a prayer service we had a mass like every day except one. We had a prayer service at the Jordan River. And the Jordan River became, for me, and was at the time, and still is, my most poignant moment. It was the thing that brought me to tears. Jordan, for whatever, didn't expect it, don't know why, but it brought me to tears. But I was very fortunate to be asked to be part of this prayer service for this particular spot. And my wife is sitting in the back, and she said, and she took pictures of it, there was a dove that was on this post. We're way down here doing our little spiel, and that dove, during the middle of the prayer service, flew down right by her, right on the little side to the side where our whole group was sitting. And I just, what do we remember at the Jordan River? Jesus is baptized. And the heavens open up and the Holy Spirit comes down like a dove on him. And so I'm thinking to myself, how neat is that? Now I'm not suggesting that, that's Holy Spirit, but it's so interesting to think about that, to be in that moment. Mark's Gospel talks about that, first chapter of Mark's Gospel. But then we actually had a chance to go down into the Jordan River. And it's really, really thin. It's that's the other side. I'm thinking Mississippi River. I don't know if Jordan River, were you expecting it to be that narrow? I didn't. I was shocked at how narrow it was, at least at the point where we were. But we were able to take off our sandals, shoes, socks, whatever. And my wife and I, because I was helping with this prayer service, I was one of the last ones down there. So I have a lot of pictures of everybody who's going in before me. It was really kind of neat. So we were some of the last ones to get to go in. And we had these little bottles everybody got to fill up with water to take back home with us. That's what we have in our hands there. And we're in there and we're filling up our bottles. And I said, in my mind, I said, I'm filling this bottle. I shouldn't be filling the bottle. I should be blessing my wife. So I stood up. I said, Katie, I want to bless you. She goes, I thought the same thing. I want to bless you. I can tell you in 30 years of marriage, she's never blessed me. Except when I sneeze. She's not a bad person, but it's never happened. I'm not kidding. I am not. We've blessed our kids. They've had their tonsils out, or they had, whatever. You bless them. We've blessed our kids when they go off to college, whatever else. She's never blessed me. And she said, I was thinking the same thing. We both started to cry, and we blessed each other, and we hugged, and we turned, and John Metz, one of our pilgrims, is there, goes, hey guys, I want to take your picture. So he snapped this, and that's it. And now that's my new favorite picture of us. And partly because, if you could see my wife, she's 5'9", and so am I. She's just a bit taller than I am. So here, I'm actually taller than her. That's my story, I'm sticking with it. So I have it on my phone. I tell people, say, how was your trip? I'm like, this is my new favorite picture of my wife and I. About a week or so ago in the daily readings, we heard from Joshua, the book of Joshua in the Old Testament. Moses had just died. They took him off and buried him. And Joshua is now going to lead, after 40 years of wandering in the desert, Joshua's going to lead the Israelites into the promised land. Do you know what I'm talking about? And God tells Joshua, hey, get a bunch of priests to take the Ark of the Covenant into the Jordan River. As soon as they step their foot in the Jordan River, what's going to happen is the river is going to stop flowing. It's going to become hard so that they can walk over into the promised land. And I'll be darned, these priests take the Ark of the Covenant and it stops and they walk over. I'm embarrassed to tell you this. I am 56 years old. I had never heard or remember that happening. All I remember is when they got the heck out of Dodge going through the Red Sea, because I've seen 10 Commandments. Charlton Heston. I feel embarrassed that I didn't know that story, but here I'm reading this, and I said to my wife, I said, I got to read this to you. I said, just close your eyes and let me read this to you. And I read this, and in the Jordan River, and she opens her eyes, she's tearing. And I'm like, we're right back there. What you said, Dan, at the beginning is so true. Going there just brought it to life. You hear the stories, you know the stories, but boy, to be able to stand there, that has such significance for the Israelites coming into the promised land and Jesus going to be baptized, unbelievably powerful, an incredibly powerful moment. My fourth spot was the Church of the Nativity. This is like true confessions here. I feel like, this is a therapy session for me. Everybody asks me, I'm one of 6 kids. My family are like, oh, what are you looking forward to the most? What are you looking forward to the most? I said, I want to see the Church of the Nativity. I love Christmas. My mom loved Christmas. Huge thing for our family. I love Christmas. Can't wait to see where baby Jesus was brought into this world. And the historian part of me knows that this church was started, as Rita referenced, by St. Helen in the early 4th century. That this was where most of the locals had been worshiping and venerating. The tradition was that this is where they were, so this is, by golly, this is where he must have been born. And so we go in there. This was one of the more disappointing days for me. And I feel embarrassed saying this, but it's, again, in retrospect, I'm looking back. I don't know if you remember, we walked into this church, and you can't walk in, by the way. That's my wife, Katie. You have to scoot down underneath. As you have to bend down to get underneath. Only the humble. You have to humble yourself. And I have no problem humbling myself. That wasn't the thing that bothered me. But when we got in there, it was we have 100 people, and we were off to the side, and we're all trying to cram into this little spot behind the altar to see where Jesus was born. And it took forever. And it was hot. And I was frustrated because there was a wedding being set up as we were doing this. And do you remember this? And I'm like, they're going to kick us out. We're not going to get there. We were talking about, we're going to be, this is what I wanted to see, and I'm not going to see. In my mind, I've already worked this out. And I was not in any frame of mind to go in there. By the time my wife and I got to go down into this thing behind the altar, you go down into the altar, and then by the time we got to this point, what happens is some police people came and said, you got to move it along. You got to move it along. Got to chop. Do you remember this? Chop, feed. We got this wedding that's got to happen. You got to keep going. So we finally get there, and I run down there. We get down on our knees. We go down. We touch where Jesus, and we up, and it's like, that was it. And it was lost to me. And I can't tell you how many Christmases I spent like that. Busy, busy, busy. Not focusing what I should have focused on, you know? I'm guilty of that. I don't know if any of you have that feeling at Christmas time, too much to do, etc. And I thought to myself, boy, what an opportunity. I mean, it's great that we have this nice picture, but it wasn't as peaceful and serene as it looks. It really wasn't. But it really made me stop to think. I remember that night in the hotel complaining about this to Katie, and she said, you know what, you just gotta slow down. You know, they're not gonna take you away. If we get in that situation, the cops aren't gonna take you away. At least I hope not. Maybe she was hoping they would, I don't know. Looking back, it's much more poignant to me and much more powerful than it was at the time, but I'm glad I did it. This was probably, after Tagba, this was probably, the Jordan River, this is the place that made me the most emotional. This is the way of the cross. So Jesus is going to walk a little bit more than a mile with this roughly 100-pound beam on his back, after being tortured the night before, having not eaten since the night before, having been whipped, having the crown of thorns in his head, everything else. He's going to carry this 100-pound beam a little over a mile to the place where he knows he's going to die. And I couldn't help but think to myself, as we're walking this is one of the tour guides. We have to get there really early in the morning, because all of these little doors you see all the way through are businesses. And they're mostly Arab businesses or whatever. They're going to have traffic. And so you can see back there's a little cart there. There are cars and stuff like that. So we have to get there early. But I'm like, all of this stuff. And then as we were going through this, as we were going 8th station, 9th station, more and more people were crowding in the street. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, Christ suffered right in the middle of all of us. Christ went through this in the midst of our busyness, in the midst of our businesses and our busyness. The suffering of Christ is right in our midst. And I just wanted to say to people as they're walking by, do you know what, did you get that? Do you understand this? And for me, it was very powerful. And we got to this place. This is the 5th station. Anybody know the 5th station? Simon of Cyrene helps to carry the cross. Our tour guide stopped us and said, that little square up there, the legend is, or the story is, that Jesus was so overcome with the weight of the cross and everything he'd been through, that he fell against the wall and he stuck his arm out to support himself. And as he did, his hand was printed onto the wall. And so they put that little thing around there. And so as soon as he said that, you know, I did, and people went up there and they touched it. They took pictures of it like I did. And I thought to myself, who are the Simon of Cyrenes in my life? Who have helped me carry my crosses? Have I been Simon of Cyrene enough to other people? You know, have I helped to carry a cross of others? That was very powerful for me to see that. And you could say, and a skeptical person might say, come on, that's not Jesus' handprint. And you may be right. Some guy who built this church in 1850 or something, you know, just happened to lead to get a smoke, you know, and it just kind of, who knows? But the point of the matter is, Jesus was on this path, on this place, and it was good to stop and to really reflect on that. Who has helped carry my cross, and when have I done that for others? The very next station has always been my favorite. Can you have a favorite station of the cross? I don't know. The 6th station is my favorite. It's St. Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. This is not in Scripture. It's not a scriptural moment. Veronica is not mentioned in Scripture. A lot of people think it was the woman who had hemorrhaged for 12 years. You know, that story, and she touches the cloak of Jesus. We don't know that. We do know that Jesus had women who followed him on the way, and they lamented. Could have that been Veronica? Don't know. I'll go a step further if I could take another minute of your time. We don't even know if that's her name. What did Veronica do? What did she do? She showed kindness, but what did she actually do to Jesus? She wiped his face with the cloth, right, with her veil. And that veil, that image of Christ, right? What we believe about that is in Latin and Greek, vera icon. It is the true image of Christ. Vera icon, Veronica. She is named after the things she's known for. We don't know what her real name is. Her real name could have been Betty, or Sue, or whatever. Mary. But the reason I like this station is because my mother's middle name was Veronica. And I think of my mother, who's passed away now 5 years, and I think of my mother, how many times she wiped the face of her 6 kids and her husband. She was probably the most compassionate person I've ever met in my life. How many times she was Veronica to me, to others. And again, to stop and to see this, where he actually walked in, and was it at that moment? Don't know, but boy, near there that this happened. It was just so very powerful to me to be able to experience the way of the cross. So those are my images. It's tying on. Oh, okay. So I don't know if you have questions for me, the three of us, or comments. Yes.
Okay, so you could touch the hand, I'm getting back to that.
Yes.
Were there things like, don't touch that, are there people yelling at you?
Yeah, no, it's funny. You go to the Louvre and you can't get like 3 feet from the wall, but you could touch that. I did. I touched that. Yeah. No, there was nobody there. There were business people there. There were workers. I mean, no, there was nobody there but our tour guide. Nobody official. There was nothing on the way of the cross that would make you know that it's anything related to Christ, other than those little plaques that you see on the wall. Except the first 1 or 2, there was like a church. It starts in a church and it ends at the Holy Sepulchre, where he was buried. But along the way, you walk past it. It's up high enough you could just miss it. Yeah. Interesting.
How early in the morning would you say that was?
We had to get out like 4:30 in the morning. It was they got us out early because the crowds would have been unpassable.
It was a Muslim quarter.
Yes.
Because Jerusalem was split up into 4 different quarters, and that was a
Right.
Muslim quarter.
Did you hear that? Jerusalem is split up into 4 quarters. A Muslim quarter,
Greek Orthodox?
Greek Orthodox or Armenian, Roman Catholic, and Jewish. And the way of the cross, if you remember the image, the map that Dan had up there before, Rita, I don't remember had it up, it's up in the top left-hand corner. It's in the Muslim area. So their businesses are there. It's like, yeah, we'll put up with you. You can do your way of the crossing, but don't be a hindrance to our business, which is,
Or buy something in our shop.
or buy something in our shops, which there was plenty of scarves and things. Any other questions for any of us? Yes.
I have a question regarding that mosaic
Yes.
of the loaves and fishes.
Yes.
Was this something that was relayed to you about the 4 loaves? I've never heard this before.
Yeah, it was. Our tour guide was excellent, and did you hear this story too, or no? About the 4 fish. When we went in there, and because it's everywhere. You go, then of course they have the gift shop, the obligatory gift shop, where you can buy it on coasters and mugs and everything else. And somebody mentioned, why are there 4 loaves? There's only 4 if there were 5. And he said the people who made the mosaic right around 400 thought Jesus' body was the 5th loaf. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Boy, I wanted to take credit for that, so it was all mine, but yeah, please, sir.
When we were in Jerusalem, in the old city, the Jewish people loved olives.
Yeah.
We had trays and trays of olives, and we didn't have extra bags to carry much,
Yeah,
but it was to see what they loved to eat,
right.
the food.
Yeah, the food, the olives were there, they were present. Hummus was everywhere.
Olive oil.
Olive oil,
Hummus,
a lot of that.
hummus.
Yeah, exactly.
Bread.
The bread, yep, very good.
Yeah, there was no losing weight on this.
No, there was, unfortunately, although we walked so much, you'd think we would have, yes.
When did you go?
It was June 12th to the 24th of this past year. Middle of June, toward the end of June. Yeah.
Yes.
Any other questions for any of the 3 of us?
You kept saying it was hot. How hot?
Well, in Rome, one day got air temperature, not feels like temperature, was 104. Israel never got to that bad. It was probably upper 80s, maybe mid to upper 80s.
But it was just hot.
It wasn't a humid hot. It was just like
No.
but when you're out in it a lot, because you're outside in it a lot, it was something else.
But the Dead Sea was like 20 degrees hotter.
Yeah, the Dead Sea was is the lowest place on earth, and it was a lot hotter. It was a lot stiller. And that was ridiculous.
We all swam in the Dead Sea.
Yes, that's true. Well, we
Floated
didn't
in the Dead
floated
Sea.
in the Dead Sea. You can't really swim in it, but so yes.
Was it unsafe? Somebody said, "Oh my God, it's
In terms of geopolitically, you mean? Like geopolitically, I never felt unsafe there the whole time.
No, the only time we encountered soldiers, well, the most direct encounter we had was in Bethlehem. When we would try to leave Bethlehem is actually, I don't know what the word I would use, imprisoned.
Yeah.
You can't freely. You can come into Bethlehem, but every time we left on a bus out of Bethlehem, the soldiers came on the bus. And
There's checkpoints.
And by the way, they're kids.
Yep.
They're 17, 18, 19 years
And
old.
they're armed to the teeth.
Right.
armed to the teeth.
And they
nothing's
want
in
to
their-
see your passport.
Nothing's in their holster. But I mean, I didn't look at, nowadays, I hate
never
to say
felt-
this.
I never felt
I never
unsafe.
felt unsafe. I never felt like some rocket was gonna come from, someplace, and I never felt that at all.
But what was interesting is like a lot of people who live in the occupied territory in Palestine, they have to cross this checkpoint in order to go to work
Right.
in Israel.
Right.
And basically, we're talking about the 200 feet, but you couldn't go through without going through this checkpoint. And when the buses, we leave early in the morning, we go through the checkpoint rather easily in comparison to other people. They have to be there quite early. They're all waiting for their buses and their rides so that they
Right.
can just continue their normal life. It was an eye-opening thing.
Yes, it was. The other thing I would say is if you do go on pilgrimage, make sure you have a bus driver. Don't drive by yourself. The driving was I felt more unsafe with that than I did with any geopolitical reason, I can tell you that. Oh my gosh, in and out. I don't think there are traffic rules, and if they are, they don't obey them. But it was amazing. But, wow, well, I think I speak for all three of us. Thank you so much for coming out. This was just a great event. I hope it's been helpful for you. So I don't know if you want to...
Steve, eat, talk.